Chapter 11. Vanessa worried about Theo, not knowing how best to comfort him. She'd hoped that he would return to France with her, but he seemed keener to spend the summer with his cousin, which she could understand given that his only family in Jamb. In the meantime, although she had been dreading the time away in France with her parents, things had not been quite as bad as she feared, at least not in the beginning. It helped that Grandma and Grandad were not there at the same time, and that the weather in St. Jean was heavenly. There was also Madame Pagnell's cooking, which could never be underestimated. Jane had come to join them for a few days, too, so all was going well until Mother received the letter from Nancy Murdoch for notoriously nattering, nitwit Nancy, who wrote to inform them, never asking, always announcing, that she and her husband would be visiting over the Bastille holiday. Father was delighted, typical. Mother was furious. Mr. Murdoch had been Father's friend for many years. They met in 1945. While taking the summer course at Oxford in preparation for colonial service. It was that they both learnt their first few words of local African languages, as well as acquiring some knowledge of tropical medicines and diet. Mr. Murdoch was subsequently posted to Tanganyika while Father had gone to Nigeria. But they had stayed in touch over the years. Whenever they got together they drank, smoked cigars, and reminisced about the good old times and their chums in the Corona Club. But it was not such a jolly time for Mother, who was left entertaining Nancy. Unlike some talkative types with whom one could without paying much attention, Nancy's chatter was of the intense variety that demanded responses. She spoke incessantly about herself, which was why, when Father refused to say no to the Murdochs, Mother insisted upon inviting Uncle Tony in France at their same time, to balance things out. Father disapproved of his brother-in-law just as much as Mother objected to Mrs. Murdoch, so this made them even. Uncle Tony was far too unconventional for Father. He had never held a steady job or married, and rumors circulated about his preferring men to women. Moreover, his politics embarrassed Father, especially in front of people like the Murdochs, who shared his conservative views. Uncle Tony was not exactly a Communist Party member. His taste in clotus, art, and wine precluded this, but he sympathized with the left. Father also resented his brother-in-law for having had the opportunities that he would have liked, being born upper class and achieving a place at Cambridge University. To make matters worse, Tony had squandered his opportunities, dropping out of Cambridge and associating with people Father deemed socially and politically unsavory. The Murdochs arrived on time, but Uncle Tony missed his train, and, because Father wouldn't go back to the station, Jane drove to fetch him instead. Father had wanted to start the meal without Uncle Tony too, but Madame Pagnell would hear nothing of the sort. To Father's chagrin, Madame Pagnell exerted considerable authority over the home in France. She had been chef to the Hume family since Mother and Uncle Tony were children, and when it came to meals, she was boss. She had a voice like thunder and a girth to match, with the result that nobody ordered her around, least of all Father. And Madame Pagnell had a soft spot for her little Antoine, so much so that the menu was chosen according to Uncle Tony's favorite dishes: foie gras, coq Saint-Jacques with black truffles and Pagnell tarte aux poires. During the meal, Jane and Uncle Tony sat next to each other, wisely paying no attention to Father, who was scowling at the far end of the table. Oh la la, Vanessa thought to herself. At least there was something undeniably happy about Jane, which was a recent change. She still didn't say much in large groups, but Vanessa now noticed a quiet confidence that could be sensed, even when she wasn't talking. Vietnam was the topic of discussion, with Uncle Tony also describing his participation in recent anti-nuclear testing demonstrations. Not surprisingly, Father grunted his disapproval, but that didn't stop Vanessa from asking questions. Did Uncle Tony think that America would be forced to withdraw their troops? She tried several times to ask the question, but, true to form, Nancy Murdoch, in collusion with Father, kept interrupting. Mr. Murdoch said nothing when his wife talked, either because he was too intimidated or, more than likely, because his wife embarrassed him. Did you know that the number of black children in English children's homes is on the rise? Nancy spoke in her affected high-pitched voice, making no attempt to link her comment to anything said before. And did you know that the brown children are the hardest to find families for? And did you know, Vanessa thought as she watched Nancy's lips, that you have chunks of green spinach lodged between your teeth? And why is that? Jane asked, the only one kind enough to indulge the woman in conversation. Well, Nancy paused. Many parents won't take the brown ones for fear of what others might think. If the children are properly black, of course, there's no mistaking the mothers. But with the brown ones, well, people gossip, you know. Few women want to be mistaken as mothers of. Nancy paused again. Mulattoes, she whispered hurriedly, as though the word itself were danger. House. That's just stupid, Vanessa scoffed. Fromages, Pagnell announced, arriving with another course. Well, you can't blame them, Nessa, Father said, covering his nose as he pushed away the plate of Munster and Camembert. Why not? People will think it rape, Nancy answered, peering dubiously at the cheeses and opting for the date garnish. Oh, that's ridiculous, Vanessa insisted. I think Nessa's right, Uncle Tony added. There are probably very few rapes. It's just people being too racist to deal with the results of their actions, or should we say passions? Precisely, Vanessa nodded. Et bar, cursed bien, Pagnell exclaimed, happy to find dents in her cheese. She had returned with the salad. Well, you can't just blame the English for being racist, you know. Mrs. Murdoch raised her palms meekly. The blacks are just as bad, if not worse. They reject them too. It's terribly distressing, but at the end of the day we just need to find these little dearies a home, don't we? So Nessa darling, how is Oxford these days? Uncle Tony asked. Vanessa smiled, knowing that her uncle felt the same way as she did about Nancy Murdoch. Everything about the woman was irritating, her high-pitched voice, her supercilious tone, her feigned generosity, and the green in her teeth. She's having a jolly time, aren't you, Vanessa? Father answered. And what's this I hear about you writing for the Oxford newspapers? Uncle Tony asked. Oh, it's just a few things for ISIS. So, you're a writer now? Nancy interrupted. How delightful. I've always thought it a super career for a woman, something that you can do when you have children. You must also learn to type, darling. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Vanessa's very interested in Africa, Mother added. She supports all their independence movements. Well, she might not be supporting them for long. Wait and see if they last. Father added, dryly. Jonathan, please. Mother tapped the side of her glass again. Vanessa shook her head, wishing she could disappear from it all. Mother had been doing so well, but now with Nancy's stupid comments and father's equally stupid remarks, she was back to her drink and it was only going to get worse. So, tell me more, darling, Uncle Tony urged, offering cigars. Cuban. Lizzie? Mother declined. Jane? He added with a wink. Vanessa watched with curiosity as Jane accepted. So this was the new Jane. Tell me more about your writing, Nessa, Uncle Tony probed, thinking she had been silenced by Nancy. Vanessa mentioned a few of the articles, including the one that she was most proud of, which critiqued American foreign policy as it pertained to their privy house discussion. Rather silly if you ask me, father mumbled. Well, nobody's asking you, mother replied, pouring another brandy, as Pagnell entered with the prized tartio poyas. Vanessa has lots of foreign friends up at Oxford, especially from Arcullo. Nice, father continued, ignoring the tart that brought around applause from ex-colonies. You mean, Madame Pagnell, this is delicieux. Fantastique. Everyone else. Vanessa smiled. Bien c'est Europe or bien c'est Porter. Mrs. Pagnell winked. Ah, Giselle. Uncle Tony was the only one who could call Madame Pagnell by her first name. What do you think? Should Vanessa become a writer? Il faut d'abord qu'elle apprenne faire la cuisine. And why must I learn to cook? Parce que, Madame Pagnell paused, looking mischievously in father's direction. Savoir faire la cuisine, qu'est savoir contrôler les bombes? You cook. You control the men's, she said, laughing at her own translation, which made everyone laugh except for father, who kept on talking. We've had quite the foreign lot to visit, haven't we, Elizabeth? One feels rather obliged to show them the world. It's very civilizing for them, really. For many years, Vanessa thought that this was just father's way of speaking. That he spoke condescendingly on most subjects without really meaning to do so. This was also how mother explained it, but Vanessa no longer believed it. Didn't we meet some of them at the Christmas party? Mr. Murdoch asked. There were Indians, I believe, and a colored man, wasn't there? Yes, that's right, father replied. They must make special concessions for them to get into Oxford these days. They're still bright for Africans, mind you. Future ministers and leaders of their countries. Oh really, Jonathan, don't be so stupid. Uncle Tony replied. Well, I'm simply telling you what I observed at Oxford, father continued. I hardly think a summer course counts as having gone to Oxford. Please, mother pleaded. Well, some of us did go to Oxbridge, Tony insisted. And dropped out, father added. Will you two stop it? Mother's voice was raised. As I was saying, father continued, we've had quite the foreign lot to visit. Including the Nigerian chappie at Balliol. Now there's a bright fellow for you. With good manners, reading PPE at Balliol, and he's Yoruba of course. They've always been the most straightforward. With the horsey you can never tell what they are up to, and the Igbos are always so sly. Oh, Daddy, you can't say things like that. Why not? They would tell you the same thing if you asked. Actually, I recall that chap looking rather like your gardener and Joe's, Nancy remarked. A lovely young man. Why ever did you sack him? Because he was an idiot, father snapped. Oh dear. I always thought. Nancy, Mr. Murdoch glared at his wife, cutting her off in mid-sentence. Jonathan's the idiot, mother muttered, recklessly filling her glass without looking. Oh, for Christ's sake, Mum. So tell me, Nessa, Uncle Tony winked again at Jane. Are Oxford women still being treated as second-class citizens, and what about he? Jonathan's the bloody idiot, Mother interrupted. You're the one that looks idiotic, Elizabeth, Father snapped. You and your beloved gardener. Did you ever tell him you were a drunk? Oh, I say. Nancy exclaimed. You say what? Mother shouted, glaring at Nancy and then at Father. Don't you remember the gardener's name? He had a name, you know. She banged the bottle back on the table. Mother. Vanessa pleaded, but she was already up and marching unsteadily, but determinedly, out of the room. Well, that was quite some drama for one night, Jane remarked as she and Vanessa went to their room after helping Madame Pagnell clear the plates. I can't believe my mother, Vanessa muttered. You shouldn't let it bother you, Nessa. Nancy's enough to drive anyone to drink. But you've got to tell me, who is this chappie from Balliol? Very nice. Chap, Jane imitated Father's accent. Oh, shut up. Vanessa tossed a pillow at her. So let's have a look at that photo again. Jane hopped from her bed to Vanessa's. Because I want to see it, silly. Come on. Not all of us are lucky enough to have handsome boyfriends, or even a boyfriend at all. And have you done it yet? Done what? You know. Jane cocked her head and raised her eyebrows. Oh, don't be such a prude. I'm not being a prude. Vanessa picked up the fallen pillow, and lobbed it back at Jane. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Promise then to tell me all about him, and I'll tell you a secret. What secret? What secret? Promise. Okay, yes. Promise. Vanessa nodded impatiently. We, as in me and your uncle, did I? On the way back from the station. What? Had sex. You what? You're so dramatic, Nessa, or this if, RCT Victorian England. The 60s for God's sake. You and your Uncle Tony. But he's not that way, including. Vanessa stammered. Inclined? Oh yes, he is. Oh God, Jane. Is this serious? No. Tony's far too old for me, though I must say that older men really have that touch. The way he. Jane. I don't want to hear. Well, if you don't want to hear, tell me about your boyfriend. What do you two get up to? Obviously nothing compared to you, but we do things like. Jane rolled her hands in continuous circles for more detail. It's not like you to be lost for words, Vanessa. Oh Jane, what does this mean for you and Tony? It doesn't mean anything. Read some Freud. It's just sex. Speaking of which, is it really true what they say about size? I have no idea. And with that, Vanessa pushed Jane off the bed. Okay, so what did your parents think of him? Jane asked, jumping back. Oh, come on, Nessa, don't be so cross. They like him. But how about what nattering Nancy was saying? Wouldn't they worry about the way people would view your children? It's just a skin color, Jane. I know that and you know that, but your father's not exactly the most liberal of thinkers. Liberal enough to marry against his parents' wishes, so I don't see how he could object. Anyway, who said anything about marriage? Of course you will. Jane thumped the mattress with her hand. Oh Vanessa, you're smitten. I can already imagine you married to him. He'll be there. Next Nigerian Prime Minister, and you'll be living over there in one of those fancy mansions with servants fanning you and bringing you food. You'll have All those lovely brown children running around. The local papers will carry the headlines. Prime Minister. What's his name again? Teo Ajayi. Vanessa smiled, momentarily forgetting her annoyance. Prime Minister Ajayi and his wife Vanessa Ajayi, Jane announced. Wriggling under the covers, visited by Drs. Jane and somebody so-and-so. Sounds good, nest spa? More likely Professor Ajayi than Prime Minister Ajayi. He wants to teach. Well, that's a shame. Never mind. I'm sure he'll be somebody important one day. A chancellor perhaps, and won't that be nobby? She rolled onto her side. Hey. She rolled back. Let's go and see Jean-Pierre and Olivier tomorrow. They ought to be back now. Vanessa shrugged her shoulders. She wasn't as excited about them as she might have been a year ago. It was Teo she dreamed of. Perhaps he would be a chancellor one day or a professor lecturing in the university. Perhaps she would do the same, or perhaps she would write for one of the national newspapers. They would live on campus or in the city maybe. She imagined shopping in the outdoor markets and at weekends enjoying long walks by the beach and nights of music and dance. She wondered what Teo was doing at that moment without her. Hopefully he wasn't meeting women. She didn't like it when he flirted with other women and especially with colored women. It didn't help that whenever Christine's name was mentioned he became withdrawn, and when she remarked on it he accused her of not understanding his culture, which made her angry. Because she was doing all that she could to understand. So, let's say, just hypothetically, if I marry Teo, would you definitely come to Africa and visit me? Vanessa peered over Jane's shoulder. Jane? She whispered, but Jane was fast asleep.